It's a huge honour for me to introduce Desney King as my first guest for the new format 2021 Writes4Women. Desney is someone I've wanted to have on the podcast for some time and the perfect choice for the first Heart of Writing episode. And this bio from her website might explain why. Desney is a writer, author, reader, stroke survivor, having had 8 strokes since 2012. She's a mother, a friend, a retired book editor, an environmental and human rights advocate and activist, a vegetarian, a meditator, a healer, and a nature lover. All of which I might say comes through in her first novel, Transit of Angels. Pre-strokes, Desney loved walking on beaches and in the bush, camping in nature, long road trips and crochet, mainly blankets. Post-strokes, she lives on her bed, making occasional forays into the outside world in her purple wheelchair. Desney's overbed table is her desk. It holds her laptop, diaries, notebooks, tablet and phone, as well as being her meal table. Hydrotherapy is her favourite exercise, and she still crochets. I first met Desney in 2008 at a series of wonderful workshops run by writer and Buddhist Joyce Kornblatt. And through the wonders of technology, we've been able to reconnect on Facebook in the last few years. Last year, I had the enormous pleasure of reading Desney's beautiful debut novel, Transit of Angels, for which I happily provided a cover quote. Transit of Angels was published in 2020 by Pilyara Press. There are 2 more novels and a memoir in the works, and it's a huge privilege to welcome Desney to the Writes4Women Convo Couch today.
Thank you so much for having me here, Pam. It's very exciting to be here.
It's wonderful to be able to catch up. Like as I said, we have known each other for quite a long time now and through a lot of writing and life tribulations. But it's great to be able to connect again and to actually be able to let people know about your novel because I enjoyed it so much. So I'd really like to start with Transit of Angels and then sort of work our way back, I guess. So could you tell us to start with what the novel is about?
Very briefly, I mean, in a word, it's about grief.
Mm.
It's about a young woman, Angelica, whose husband is killed in an accident right at the beginning of the book. And the entire book is Angelica's travels through grief, through all the aspects of it, and not stepping back from that really. Angelica telling the story in such a way that she carries the readers with them, and slowly her re-emerging back into some kind of a new life.
Yeah, I think that sums it up beautifully. And, when I read it, I was so struck by, in a way, the normality of her experience, but also the universality of that, that it's one woman's situation that many people have experienced the loss of a very close loved one. But you deal with it in such a beautiful and heartfelt way. And I just wondered, I know that it's been a long time project of yours. Where did the idea first evolve? Where did it come from for you?
Where did it come from? So you were there, Pam. It came to me, I can't remember the theme of Joyce's 2008 workshop. I suspect it must have been very much about examining our hearts and looking for the most painful stuff and the most joyful stuff, and writing exercises around all of that and more. And by about August, September, I thought, oh, something's happening here. And by October, I looked at the bits and pieces I'd written and I realised that I had started to write a novel, which is the novel that became Transit of Angels.
Yeah.
So it's been 12 years in the making. It was probably almost 12 years to the day from that realisation to release date, which is bizarre.
That is bizarre. Yeah, it's quite incredible. So I didn't realise that this initial idea came from those workshops that we did together with Joyce.
It did, and also my background. I mean, you mentioned that I've been a healer. I am a healer. I did a lot of palliative care work when I was focused on healing work, while my children were growing up. And so I had the privilege of spending a lot of time with people who were dying slowly, mainly from cancer, one from motor neuron disease, and with their friends and with their families. And I also volunteered at hospices and so on. So I've been up very close with people who are grieving because they're dying, and everybody around them and the grief that they experience. And of course, grief in my own life, not from losing a partner, but certainly my mother's death when I was 40. So,
right. Yeah. It's such a difficult topic, as you know. It's one that I write about as well, and it is such a difficult topic, isn't it? Because it's something that we tend to shy away from. It's one of those things that, death is something that most of us fear. And so there's all these emotions around talking about it. But I guess in your position where you've had that privilege, as you say, of speaking with people at different stages of grieving as well, it's enabled you to have a really thorough understanding, I guess, of how people do deal with it.
yes, and that was also one of, I guess as the book evolved over the years prior to that stroke in 2012, it became increasingly important to me that I must write a novel about dying and death and grief and what that experience really feels like. Because I think in Western society, as you say, we don't deal well with any of those things, and we tend to we don't have a lot of rituals and ceremony as many other cultures have. We tend to give people about 6 or 8 weeks and then expect them or say to them even, look, it's been a while, it's time you started moving on. And so,
Yeah, that's true.
like grief never goes away. And so the challenge for me was to write a novel about grief, and it's in the first person, present tense. So
Yes.
it is a right there with Angelica.
Yeah, it's very immediate. Yeah.
Every step of the way, without losing them, without it being so immediate and so painful that readers couldn't handle it. So that was a craft challenge, I suppose, and a challenge as an author, as a writer. Yeah.
Yes, that's true, because the story is hugely character driven, isn't it? And
Yes.
and driven by the emotion and the feelings and the experience that Angelica has. It's not a heavily plotted novel in terms of action or anything. So as you say, there is a great challenge in that, in keeping the reader and having them travel on that journey with your main character.
Yes, I'm a pantser, Pam, and for any listeners who
Yeah.
don't know that term, that's someone who writes by the seat of their pants. It just, no plotting, no whiteboards, no stickies on the wall, nothing.
Yeah.
Just, and honestly, for a lot of the time, when I was writing, I knew I was writing a novel, and I knew as a long-term editor that I needed to aim for at least around 80,000 words, and I had no idea how I could possibly get that far.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So did you find in the well, not even in the early stages, but even when you were a couple of years into the writing, that you were sort of really exploring the ideas through the writing and learning about the character and all that sort of thing?
Honestly, Pam, and this, I don't feel as though I really wrote this book. I feel as though it came through me. I don't know anybody like Angelica. None of the characters are based on anybody I know. She's absolutely not me or anything like me. It emerged. So I would write every morning. This is, you know, when I was writing the first draft, I would get up every morning an hour early before going into work. So get up at 4:30. I had a ritual with the right tablecloth and the teapot and the cup and the candle and et cetera, and I'd just sit down and the story would pour out for about an hour, and it'd just stop, and that was it. It was done.
Wow.
And so doing that every day, I think the first draft just sort of poured out over about 5 or 6 months. And then, yes, I did. I've got notebooks full of notes on the characters and the settings and their astrology and the numerology and
yeah.
I don't know if you do that.
I do for some. Well, most of my books I end up with quite detailed character analysis, but like you say, I often do that later. You know, I try and get the story out first and see what I've got.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that. I love being a pantser too. I keep trying to be a plotter, but it doesn't work. Not for me anyway, and not for you, obviously.
Not for me. Yeah.
So without giving spoilers, Desney, could you tell us a little bit more about Angelica, the main character, and the journey that she does go on through the course of the novel with this dealing with the grief?
Sure, yes. Look, Angelica's 34 when her husband Bill is killed in a motorbike accident. That's not a spoiler, it's in the blurb on the back cover of the book.
Yeah.
And so she's a very young widow. She and Bill have had a really happy marriage, living in the inner city suburbs of Sydney. She's working as a graphic artist, but she is actually an artist. She has a twin sister and a younger sister. I won't say much more about Angelica. But you know, she's had stuff happen in her life, but nothing that would prepare her in any way to suddenly find herself a widow at 34.
Yeah.
And so what happens to, she doesn't really hold anything back in her telling of the first, the whole experience of grief. You know, she's still referring to her grief by the end of the book. But she goes into areas that are taboo, really. You know, she talks about, she shows us really how much she misses their sex life and the many intimacies of the relationship, including their sex life and their conversation and all sorts of things. She looks for signs. I think this is very common. You know, so there are a lot of commonalities for people who are experiencing grief. She looks for signs that Bill might still be around. And eventually, as she's beginning to emerge from the paralysis of the first year or so of grief, she's isolated herself, and she starts to talk to her twin sister again, and through a series of events she does move to the country, to a remote valley.
It's such a beautiful, beautiful setting that she finds herself in. And I wondered where, so it's on the Hawkesbury, isn't it?
It's on the Hawkesbury.
Yeah. And is it somewhere that you're familiar with yourself?
It's a fictional valley, but it is very closely based on a valley I lived in. I rented an old farmhouse for about 2.5 years in a valley very much like the Dawson River Valley. but not, but similar.
Yeah. No, it's really lovely. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment, because we're going to get you to read a short excerpt. But I just wanted to ask you, touch on you mentioned that it is first person present.
Yes.
Was that an instinctive voice for you right from the beginning, or did you play around with the point of view at all?
Look, that's how it came out. And there was a point several years in. So when I had the stroke, it was February 2012, the first stroke, I was on the 13th draft.
Wow.
And so I had played around with it a lot. And there was a point where I think I'd read somewhere, or the conversation in writing circles was, oh, you know, it's what were people saying, that it's a very debut author thing to write in the first person, and it's the easy cop out and so on. I thought, oh no, I better make it third person. So I had a go at making it third person, which didn't last very long at all, because it just didn't work. We had to be right up close and personal with Angelica all the way. Otherwise it just fell apart. So
yeah. Oh, good on you for sticking to your guns with it. I mean, you hear all these crazy things, don't you? You know, you should never open with this, or you should never use that sort of voice, or whatever. But it all comes back to whatever works for your story and for you as a writer, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and for the characters.
Yeah. And it's different often for each story that you write and each character that you're dealing with.
Yes, that's true too.
So let's get back to talking about the setting. It is very gorgeous. It's evocative. She does move to this remote river valley, and she's living in a mud brick house. And it's partly or largely through her environment that this healing process starts for Angelica. And I just wondered if first of all, I'd like to talk about how you find nature as a regenerative and as a healing power, if you like, or a source of healing.
Yes, I should just say that mud brick cottage is probably my dream house. I've never seen or been in a cottage anything like it.
Yeah. Well, you dreamed it up beautifully, because I could picture it when you described it.
I'd love to live there. Nature, I was born in Wagga in New South Wales. So I lived my first 3 years on a big wheat and sheep property.
Okay.
My mum was a farmer until she left home at 23.
Yeah.
And she raised me with a real love of the country, love of nature. You know, she had these envelopes with ears of wheat and ears of oats and so on that she'd pull out and say, this is really where your foods come from. And,
Fantastic.
she brought everything back to nature. And she talked about the seasons and, so I guess I was raised with mum's very strong connection to nature. She passed that on, and I feel that we are all connected, that there's no separation, that nature is us and we are nature. And so I've always found that living somewhere in nature, whether it be a bushy suburb or, as I mentioned, living out in the valley for a couple of years, it was really just to immerse in nature. I've also got a very dear friend who lives up in the Northern Tablelands area of New South Wales.
Oh, beautiful.
And she has, Rosie, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me mentioning her, has just under 1,000 acres of rainforest and country bordering on World Heritage wilderness. And I was lucky enough, from 20, 25 years ago to spend time up there be in the forest and with other people, the people around her who know the forest intimately and so on. So that's been incredibly healing. You know, when I went through a terrible marriage breakup, they're all terrible, I suppose, but it was very, very, very painful. And I'd go out and spend time at Rosie's and come back healed on lots of levels and so on. So, and there was something else I wrote down, Pam.
That's all right.
No, and of course I grew up, I spent those first 3 years in the Riverina area, but then I grew up in Newcastle in a suburb that was, it was surrounded by, I grew up on Stockton, which is almost an island. So it's got the Hunter River on one side, the harbour on and the Pacific Ocean on the
beautiful.
other side. So I grew up with the ocean and the river, and, you know, rivers are really powerful for me as well, and powerful in Transit of Angels as well.
Yeah, the river plays a really strong role, and it's very symbolic, I think, in the book. But
Yes.
we did talk about an excerpt. So I think you've got a little excerpt, Desney, you're going to read for us. Because I just want listeners to hear the beautiful language. I mean, the way that you write and the way you draw on that natural world and like you say, that connection that you were talking about really comes through in the book between Angelica and the other characters and their environment. So I really want people to experience that.
And I'm just before I read, I'll say, I believe that nature is a character in the book. The world of nature is in the book, and as you said, the river is a character in the book. So this excerpt
absolutely.
From about a third of the way through, Angelica's just moved to the cottage and in the valley, and she's having a meltdown because she's wondering what on earth she's done and how she's going to cope, and also grieving over how she could possibly have left the house that was hers and Bill's.
Yeah.
So she's with her twin sister Essie. We both have Essies in our books.
We do. What a lovely name.
She's just about to have a meltdown. Essie sees me slipping. Let's go for a walk, Angel. Come on, get your cap. We're going down to the river. She pulls me firmly by the hand. Tashi, who's Angelica's little dog, yelps and leaps, but this is no time for walking the dog. Chest-high fronds of softly seeded grass brush us as we walk single file along the track. In the whispering heat of late afternoon, the river laps against its banks. Essie pushes through heavy green foliage, holding back branches so that I can pass, all the time moving closer to the water, to the shimmering ebb and flow of this valley's ever-changing heart. Breaking through into a light-flooded clearing, I realise she's been here before, knows about the almost white sand, the mound with its short, soft grass, this secret place where sisters can sit and be initiated into the river's arcane ways. She pulls me down beside her, keeping hold of my hand, urgent, silent, fierce. There's no way to go except forward, Angel, she murmurs. Look at the river, how it moves, always moves. Does it question its purpose? Think about giving up or turning back? Then she points to the forested hillside, reaching up to the vivid blue sky, the ancient smudged sandstone that long ago lined the ocean floor. Sometimes the change is so slow that even the gods seem unaware.
It's really beautiful, Desney. I've got goosebumps once again listening to that. Thank you. You mentioned there Essie, her sister, and there's a number of other characters that we meet as the story unfolds, Clyde and a few others. Could you tell us just a little bit about some of those support characters?
Yes. Essie, you know, and we meet Essie's partner Liz very early in the book. So they've lived out in the valley for quite a few years. Essie's a school teacher, a tiny little one-teacher school, and Liz is an environmentalist working with the river. Who was the character you mentioned? Clyde.
Oh, sorry, not Clyde.
Clyde, yeah, Clyde will do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Clyde is an wise old man who lives in the valley and is a friend to Essie and Liz and becomes a friend to Angelica as well. And there's another character, and you asked me earlier how the story changed and evolved over the years. There's a character who was barely mentioned early on in all the early drafts, and then I realised how important he was. And his name is Neil. He's Bill's older brother.
Yes, that's right.
Estranged for a long time, since Bill was a teenager. And you know, Angelica had been looking for Neil. Neil's a crusty, gruff, nomadic loner. And Angelica looks for him to tell him about Bill's death and for the funeral, and so I can't find him, and so on and so on. But then Neil started to come to life for me, and ironically, you know, a month before I had that first stroke, so Boxing Day, New Year, 2011, 2012, I've lent me a beach house up on the north coast of New South Wales, and I spent that week writing about 10,000 words of Neil into the story and working it through. And it's interesting because yes, he's crusty and he's gruff and he's rough and shouldn't be a lovable character, but I think Angelica comes to love him, and I've come to be very fond of him.
Yeah. He's quite, there's a lot of poignancy around his character and about that relationship with Bill.
Yes. Yes.
And the relationship Angelica comes to have as well.
Yes, that's true. And we can't forget Tashi, her little brown dog.
That's right.
Is with it really, Tashi is all that keeps her going through that first paralysed, isolated year. You know, the need to feed the dog, walk the dog, etc., etc. So Tashi, you know, Tashi keeps her going.
Yeah, which is often the case, isn't it, with people who are in that deep grief? You know, having to be there for an animal,
yes,
does keep people going. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But I think that's one of the things that happened, and that I was also probably subconsciously feeding into the story all the way along. These things that are very common to all of us when we're grieving. You know,
yes.
that there is someone or something that forces us to keep going.
Yes.
That many people do look for a sign, and many people do start looking to mystical realms, or looking into alternative viewpoints, I suppose, to try and explain, or to try and hoping that their loved one is still around, or trying to kind of just, you know, find out if they are, or how they can connect, or, you know, it's all really, and then being really angry with the person who's died. You know, those stages of grief that are all numbered neatly, but that never happen in that order and never happen that neatly. They're messy.
That's right. Yeah, all over the place. How far into, you mentioned that I think in around 2012 when you had the stroke, you'd done 13 drafts. Is that right? So
Yes.
that's the point at which you had your first stroke?
Yes. And I had, this is a terrible confession, but I'm going to do it. I remember I'd been an editor for 30 odd years and a teacher a lecturer in editing and publishing and so on. And so how many times had I said to people, never send your first draft out to publish it? But I did.
Oh, we've all been there. Yep.
Oh, so embarrassing. Anyway, I've still got all the rejection, list of all the rejection.
Yeah.
And that's what propelled me into the second, third, fourth, and into the 13th draft. And then that 13th draft was the one where I went away just before I had the stroke and really developed Mel's characters. So yeah.
And so after you had that first stroke, Desney, I'm imagining that there was a big stall in the writing for you.
Huge, Pam. I was in hospital for 9 days in the stroke ward, and it seemed as though I'd come away very lucky from a brainstem stroke.
Wow.
Brainstem strokes are the ones that can kill you on the spot
or
get you in locked-in syndrome. So yes, I am incredibly lucky. I think I am. I know I am. But it took months for all the damage to reveal itself. And there's a lot of damage, and there's been a lot more damage done over the years as I've had subsequent small brainstem strokes. And I couldn't write. No, I couldn't write at all well, that's not quite true. What I haven't mentioned is that long before I met you, I started writing morning pages as advocated by Julia Cameron in her book, The Artist's Way. And so I think I've been writing morning pages for about 18 years.
Wow.
Every morning. And I think I've probably only missed about 2 weeks worth of mornings in that whole time. I wasn't writing them during those 9 days in the stroke ward. But I started as soon as I got home. So yes, I was writing morning pages, but that's all. I'd been blogging about editing and publishing and life in general. I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't, I had cognitive damage. I have worse cognitive damage now. So yeah, I couldn't write.
Yeah. And did you find that it's really interesting about the morning pages? And I'm just realizing, I think it was probably when I first started doing morning pages after those workshops, you probably introduced me to them. I haven't done them that much lately, but how did you? I know, don't tell Joyce. Did you find that doing those morning pages when you could get to the page in the morning, that was a part of your recovery? How did the writing help you?
Absolutely, it's an anchor, and it's Julia probably says this in the book, but what you realize when you write morning pages is it's a writing discipline, so it builds extraordinary discipline. They're called morning pages because they're the first thing you do every morning. So you're prioritizing not only your writing discipline, but also yourself. So you're grounding yourself. It's a form of therapy. So the rules with morning pages, there aren't many, but they are that it's handwritten, stream of consciousness, and nobody ever reads them. You don't read them yourself, and nobody else ever reads them. And when each notebook is full, you destroy it. That's it. They're gone. So it's a form.
Oh, you can destroy them. Does that mean that those boxes I've got of them in my study, I can actually get rid of now?
You can have a bonfire, not right in the summer, but yes. You can.
Good to know.
I must confess, I've saved a few along the way that I thought had material in it, you know, bits and pieces that might be useful for some other writing that I was doing. So, yeah. Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you. So back to the novel. When were you able to then come back to the novel and think, okay, now I think I want to do something with it? Like, what happened next?
Well, rarely. So I got back to blogging first. A good friend, Chloe, about 6 months after that first stroke, because you know, she's a good writing friend, and she said to me, Desney, surely you can write something. You must be able to write something. Write a haiku. It's only 17 syllables. Write a haiku. So I started blogging these atrocious haiku. But, you know, that was my entree. But honestly, Pam, I'm an optimist by nature. I'm a Pollyanna, really. Luckily, I think, born that way. Every time I started to feel a little bit more competent cognitively and a little bit more on top of daily life, just getting through the days, I would open up the file for Transitive Angels and try and do a little bit on it and realise that I couldn't. And that was actually, it's still really emotional. That was extremely difficult, really difficult. There were probably over the, what is it, nearly 9 years now. I'd say 8 years until it was picked up by a publisher. I might have spent 2 or 3 weeks all up looking at the manuscript and doing very little with it. Yeah.
And so how did it come into the hands of Pilyara Press?
Well, back to the teaching, editing and publishing days. And I ran one half-day seminar on the inside workings of a publishing house for wannabe authors. And Jennifer Schooler was ending that. It was 20 years ago, more.
Wow.
But there was a morning seminar, and I remember she stayed back and we ended up chatting in the foyer for a little while. And she told me that she was on her way with her first manuscript to meet an agent to see if the agent would take her on. And the agent did. And the rest is history. And, you know, we clicked straight away, and we maintained a very spasmodic, occasional connection over the years, more so, you know, with Facebook. But I read every one of her books as they were published. Really admired, because Jenny, if I'm an environmentalist, Jenny's the ultimate conservationist.
Yes.
She has a brilliant way of writing fantastic stories that weave those themes into the story without preaching at readers at all. So I had messaged her. We'd been messaging a little bit through 2019, just about the books that she was working on at the time. She'd actually been messaging me and asking me little editorial questions.
Oh, like, really?
Should it be this word, or should it be that word, or should it be a comma? I don't know. And I loved that, because it was tapping into that part of me that had been inactive for so long and unacknowledged. And you know, so it was really warm, but very occasional kind of contact. And then at the end of, I'd answered one of those questions for her, and somewhere along the line I must have sent her one of the drafts of Transitive Angels. And at the end of one of those little messaging exchanges, Jennifer Sculler said to me, by the way, you do know that Pilyara Press would love to publish your novel when you're ready. And it was about 9 o'clock at night, and I didn't know what to say. I had honestly, you know, during those years when I tried to work on it and I couldn't, I had let it go. You know, I Buddhist style practice for 30 odd years. And I know the power of letting go because it liberates you, you know, accepting what is and truly letting something go. And so I'd let Transit of Angels go into the very back depths of my laptop and thought, well, you know, it's just going to stay there. And and so I didn't know what to say. I didn't know. So I slept on it. And then I wrote with Pilyara Press, as you know, and but perhaps a lot of listeners might not know, is a collective of wonderful writers and professionals with all the skills required to publish a book professionally. And so it's collective and it's a cooperative, so that we all help each other, we all work for each other. And I wrote a long email to Jennifer the next morning explaining how much her offer meant to me and how much I would love to accept, but that I didn't feel I could reciprocate sufficiently. And 2 hours later, I received a reply in capital letters saying, "We would love to have you and your book."
Fantastic.
So that was, that's how.
And what an amazing story of, again, connection. You know, that connection that you'd made all those years ago, and then coming back at the right time too into your life.
Yes. And I also didn't know whether I'd be able to cope with the process of being edited. I had no idea whether I'd be able to handle that.
But you did.
But I did. I was going to say it was nerve-wracking, but it was actually really fun. I had marvelous editors. You know, hats off to the editors at Pilyara Press. Honestly, really wonderful. The book is a much better book for the work they did with me, but as I wasn't particularly nervous about being edited, but they were very nervous about editing my work.
Yeah, well, I bet they were. Editing the editor.
Because I'd been an editor for a long time, but it was a joy. It was such a joy. It was back into that world again, and valuing their work so much, and their insight and their suggestions and their kindness and gentleness, and you know, their way of working. And it was a fantastic experience. It was very slow, but because I can only do a short amount of work per day, and not every day at that. So it was slow, but it was wonderful. Yeah.
So what was it like after all that you'd been through and the time that you'd spent on that book to hold that first copy in your hand?
There's a very cute / embarrassing little video on my YouTube channel showing me opening that first copy. It was just, I was like a little kid, absolutely like a little kid. I cried myself. Oh, it's real, I can't believe it. Yeah. Do you know that feeling? Is that how you feel?
I do. It's like it's like you're having an out of body experience almost, you know. I think it's
Yes.
And it's the same with it. Like people think, oh, you know, like I know this was your debut novel and probably the first one that you've seen, you know, with a cover on it and all that sort of thing. But it never gets old either, you know, because each book is a different experience, and each book has its own joys and its own difficulties. And so to actually get to the point where that's all come together and it's got a beautiful cover on it and you know that it's going to go out to readers, it's a unique experience each time.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm pleased to hear that. I'm pleased for you, but that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah. So you are working on something else, Desney, I believe?
I am. I had along the way, you know, probably while I was still smarting from all the rejections of my perfect first draft, I belonged to a writing group for a number of years, and I started, one was through NaNoWriMo, the November National Writing Month. So there are 2 novels with a few thousand words each, and there's a memoir. And the memoir is called Blank Canvas, and my heart is with fiction. My heart is with storytelling. It brings that sort of life force energy right up through me from the soles of my feet, right? And I get lost in it. And so I pulled out the novel that it's called Love Song for Timmy Chan. And Timmy Chan is nothing like Angelica, and nothing like. And he'd been hassling me. He's a really cynical kind of a,
I love that he's hassling you.
Anyway, and he'd been hassling me from the time that Transit of Angels was released. Come on, you know, tell my story. And so I did. I got out that file and I tried to do it. And that was actually a heartbreak because at the moment I'm not capable cognitively of writing a novel. However, somewhere else along the way, I'd had someone do it for me, collect a lot of blog posts that I'd written at one point post-strokes or during the strokes. And I made a decision at that time and always that so Blank Canvas is really about, you know, when life strips away all your facades, who are you? What's your purpose for living? Why are you here?
Yeah.
And blog posts that are collected are all the bright, shiny, looking on the bright side, finding the silver lining. All those blog posts are that. And so with Blank Canvas, what I want to do is intersperse what was really going on.
Okay.
And how tough a lot of it was. And, you know, just... You know,
I love that idea. Yeah, what the facade and then what's happening behind all that. Yeah.
Well, the facade, and people say, who, even in your introduction of me, you know, all those things that I am or I say I am, but they're facades in a way, really. Underneath all that, or when all that's stripped away, there's the essence of us. But what is that?
Yeah.
You know.
It's a big question, isn't it?
Big question. And, you know, what can I do? Why am I here? Why am I still here?
Well, someone who's been through what you've been through has, I think, some special insight into that too.
Yeah. Yeah, and because of my own spiritual practices and writing practices and all of that. And again, it's that same thing. I want to gently but firmly insist that readers see what it's really like to have everything stripped away and what it's really like to be in hospital and what it's really like to have your head in a cage, locked in a cage inside an MRI machine that sounds like a building site. all those things that we toss it around these days. We say, oh, I'm going in for a colonoscopy, I'm going in for an MRI. They're not simple things.
Yeah.
So all of that. So I want to uncover those things and intersperse those realities with.
Yeah. That'd be wonderful. I'll look forward to reading it. And I love the title.
You like the title?
I do. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
The last question, I guess, that I have, well, a couple of questions, Desney, to finish up. And you did talk about this with your fiction and how much you love writing fiction, but what would you say is at the heart of your writing?
Oh, I've thought and thought about this. I did write something down. What is at the heart of my writing? It is that ultimate connection with all of creation, that creative force that when I write, and I think this is true for most writers, we become one with that creative force. There's no separation, and so the writing flows from my heart, not from my head. It's from my heart. That's part of it. That's a big part of it. And I think the other big heart-based part of it for me is that urge that I was born with to shine a light into the world, to be optimistic, to show that to other people, to give other people the opportunity to to gently support other people in that view of the world, if you like. Yeah, come from the heart, really. We call it the gut, but the gut and the heart are very, very closely connected.
I knew there was a reason why I wanted you to be the first Heart of Writing guest. There it is. So what would you say, Desney, to people who, for whatever reason, whether it's a physical disability or an emotional problem or some difficulty that they're experiencing which they feel has stopped them writing or that stops them from getting to the writing, what would you say to them?
I would actually say to them, let it go. Let it go. Stop trying. Let it go. Deeply accept that at this time in my life, I really can't do this, and just let it go. And if you can arrive at that place of very deep acceptance, it's liberating, because it leaves you with all the energy you have to do what you can do and what you have to do at the time. And I've been thinking a little bit about that, if you love something, let it go, and if it's to be, it will come back to you. So not quite that really, but I'd say, really, really in a meditative way, if that's comes naturally to you, deeply accept that you can't write at the moment. And that's okay. That's okay. But never say never. Never say never. Because we never know what's up ahead. Now might be really the pits, and we might feel hopeless and useless and incompetent and all those things. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen this afternoon, or next year, or in 12 years' time, or whatever it is. And the other thing that I've learned as a stroke survivor, rehab is very, very much focused around setting goals. And that drove me crazy for a long time, because I couldn't really set goals because of the nature of, because I live with crippling fatigue constantly. I have for nearly 9 years now. Setting goals was just the most frustrating thing for me. And so I didn't. So I just didn't. I did that deep acceptance thing of goals. But what I started doing, just for fun, really, was writing down impossible goals.
Oh, okay.
And so they're impossible goals. This isn't real. I know I can't do it. Right now I can't do it. I can't do it. But an impossible goal would be to find a publisher for Transit of Angels and have it published. And there've been a few other impossible goals that have turned real. Fantastic. Along the way. This is a big one, obviously.
Yeah.
But there've been a few other little ones that have astonished me. And again, I think it's that completely letting go process. It allows things that we can't imagine or envision to come into our lives and manifest or happen in some way, in a way that we couldn't have planned or organised if we tried. So
yeah, I love that. Some impossible goals there, everybody. Start setting them.
yeah, because you just never know.
Yeah, it's very true.
Yeah.
It's been such a joy talking to you, Desney.
Can
you tell us, first of all, where people can find you on social media? I follow you on Instagram and I love your morning posts, so I'd love people to find you there. So you could tell us that, and also where they can get the book.
Sure. Thanks, Pam. Yes, so Instagram, Desney King author. I've also got a Desney King author page on Facebook. And anything significant that happens with the book will be on both of those. I have a website, desneyking.com.au. And because of my disabilities, I'm not selling the book directly myself, but it's available online at all online retailers worldwide.
Yep.
And at the moment through Amazon as an ebook as well. I might extend that to other ebook publishers as time goes by, and as I can. But at the moment, it's available online. And also, there's a wonderful, for Sydney-siders, Australia, Sydney-siders, there's a wonderful old bookstore in Glebe called Glebe Books, and they are stocking the book in store. So, and also Novella Bookshop in Wahroonga on the
great
north side of Sydney. They're stocking the book as well, but generally online. And there is a little buy my book tab on my website that gives some useful links that makes it easy for people to find online stores.
Okay, and I'll put those links in the show notes too for people to come back and find. So thank you so much for being my very first guest for the year and for sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us.
Such a pleasure, Pam. And I feel really honoured to be your first guest. Thank you.
And good luck with the memoir. I'll look forward to reading it.
Yeah, just hang on for a couple of years.
I will. No rush when you get to it.
I'm very much looking forward to All We Dream, that's it, isn't it?
It's All We Dream, yeah.
Next week?
By the time this goes to air, it will be out. Yeah, so that's the book that we share the same character, Essie, the same name.
It is. I can't wait.
Oh, thank you, Desney.
Thanks, Pam.
All the best.
You too.